Ladies and gentlemen, fellas, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to finish up the top 20 rankings for my running backs as of right now for fantasy football 2020. And what we have so far is our top 16 in the bag. I'll list them all up right now. You can go check out that's broken down into three videos. 3 videos of those 16 running backs. We did 6, and then 4. We're going to finish up the final 4 right now. And a lot of these guys, the last video was a lot of in-depth stuff. This is going to have even more in-depth stuff because parsing these guys apart is going to be very, very fine-tuned. And we're getting news, finally some news during this offseason, and the guy on the screen behind me is going to be impacted by that news with some Carlos Hyde signing. So I'm excited to break that down, where I think the impact is, how it affected me in terms of my ranking of Chris Carson, and what I think it actually means for him. And we'll get into all the other running backs, and of course, in this video. But first, relax. How you doing? Tell me about your day. Relax, take your shoes off, get your beverage. This time is for you right now. And all I ask in return, is if you hit the big old like button, right? The big old like button. And if you smash the subscribe button, because that helps me reach more people. The content is getting a ton of positive feedback. I'm feeling really good as we head into the months of June, July, and especially August. If we can keep this momentum up, I think very special things are on the horizon. And that's thanks to all of you guys sharing it, liking it, all that stuff, and hitting the notification bell and subscribe button allows it to reach more people. That's likely how you found me. So if you could do that, take 2 seconds of your time. I greatly appreciate it. Hop on into the Discord right now down below. The draft guide is going to be ready in 2 weeks. I have a lot of people asking about my rankings. I have 100+ player profiles coming. I have a ton of stuff, key stats, projections. All this stuff is coming in the draft guide in 2 weeks. Hop down into the Discord right now. We're making some fantasy leagues, dynasty leagues in there. It's totally free to enter. I'll update you on the draft guide while you're in there as well. So that's free down below in the Discord. And let me know the question of the day so far. Would you rather have Chris Carson or Melvin Gordon for 2020 fantasy football? Just a redraft PPR as it stands today of you watching this. Chris Carson or Melvin Gordon? Let me know. Question of the day. Get some interaction going on down there in the comments section. All right, so bam, you got the 16 running backs on the screen right now. You're all prepped. You're all primed. If you haven't gotten to watch one of those, go watch those after this one, of course. Again, take your shoes off. Relax. Please take off those goddamn shoes, and let's have a good time. This time is for you. Zone everything else out. Let's get into this video right now for you, starting with Chris Carson. So there's obviously an elephant in the room with Chris Carson in terms of Carlos Hyde coming in there. Carlos Hyde, a 1,000-yard rusher last year with Houston, and now he's coming in to back up Chris Carson, or is he there to steal some work for Chris Carson? Now, I'll let you know where my mindset was in terms of my rankings. I had Chris Carson as my 17th overall running back before you had Carlos Hyde come in. I have Chris Carson now as my 17th overall running back. So you can see nothing changed, but there was a moment yesterday where I moved Chris Carson below some of the other guys in this video to number 19 overall. And then I started to think about it more, and we actually got more news in terms of just beat writers coming out with reports. And the news pretty much said that Carlos Hyde was going to more so be a threat to Rashad Penny. Rashad Penny, who is potentially going to open the year, and now with this addition, seems like he's going to open the year on the PUP list, the physically unable to perform list. And you can see this quote right here that I'll put on the screen by a Seattle Times beat reporter that said, despite the signing of Hyde, the Seahawks still intend on Carson to be one of their primary offensive weapons in 2020. One reason why they didn't want to pay too much for Freeman, because Freeman wanted more money, because Freeman is more of a pass-catching threat. They would have to involve him more. They're looking more for someone to complement Carson and give another option, then take Carson's job. That is exactly what I figured when this happened, because you look at Carlos Hyde's skill set. The man caught 10 balls on 14 targets last year. The man was pretty good after contact last year, but in terms of a true efficiency metric on a per-carry basis, he was not that good. I mean, Bill O'Brien ran the guy for over 1,000 yards, which is great, but it's because of Bill O'Brien running the guy out there so much when you have other highly efficient backs on a per-touch basis like Duke Johnson in your backfield. I mean, Chris Carson literally set the NFL record last year with fumbles for 7, and you can see my tweet right here once the Adam Schefter news broke on Carlos Hyde. Chris Carson has 7 fumbles last year. That sets an NFL record, and he's still playing over a former first-round pick in Rashad Penny. Penny was starting to play a little bit more before injury, but it was never in any extent that really made me concerned for Chris Carson's role. They love Chris Carson in Seattle, and you have now Carlos Hyde, who has a worse skill set by all metrics, going to be on the wrong side of 30 by the time the season really starts getting underway, turning 30 in a few months. And you have Hyde, not a pass catcher. Chris Carson started to develop those pass catching skills last year. You have Chris Carson, a much better runner on the ground at this stage in his career, and probably ever, than right now Carlos Hyde is. So for me, this looks like a very true backup situation. The skill sets don't complement each other enough to be a 1A, 1B, because neither of them, and if any of them, really Chris Carson would be the one that has the pass catching upside, not Carlos Hyde. So that gets the elephant out of the room for us. I would have been a lot more concerned if it was Devonta Freeman going there, because he can actually catch passes and better than Chris Carson. So that would have been a concern with getting Chris Carson maybe off the field on third downs. But right now, after the development of his pass catching game last year, I'm going to keep him at RB17. Let me know if you have any other takes or concerns about that. But Chris Carson last year played in 15 games. He really only played in 14 games. He missed week 17 with injury, and then he kind of missed week 16. He only played on like 30% of the snaps. He ended up having a hip fracture. But overall, he played on 73.9% of the snaps. He had 278 attempts for over 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns. He saw 43 red zone touches, and he caught 37 balls, right? Over 2 per game on 46 targets. They hyped him up as a pass-catching threat last preseason, and he ended up, the coach speak by Pete Carroll, ended up actually playing true there. Seattle ran the ball 30.1 times per game. That was the third most. And Chris Carson was a beast. He was 4th in yards created. He was highly efficient last year. He was 12th in fantasy points per game, 5th in rushing yards, 6th in evaded tackles, which helps him with his yards created number, and 3rd in breakaway runs, which measures runs of 15 or more yards. So again, effective and efficient. But let's look from weeks 10 to weeks 15, where he had a full 6 games before that week 16 injury occurred. He was averaging 16.5 fantasy points per game, 1 more per game than his actual season average. He had 4 games of over 100 total yards by both receiving and rushing in those 6 games. He had 22 evaded tackles. He had on the season 7 games of 100 plus total yards in 9 games with 77+% of the snaps. 77+% of the snaps, and you're looking at 50% of his games, the man was seeing 24 or more touches. He was a true workhorse in a league that doesn't have many more true workhorses left. So I love Chris Carson. Yes, he got hurt last year and it's a hip injury, which is concerning, but the fact that they added Carlos Hyde does not concern me. It's not somebody that I think, especially at the age of 30 years old by the time the season starts, is going to really push Chris Carson out of the job. The fact that Chris Carson can set the record for NFL fumbles last year and Pete Carroll has smiles on his face and saying, go back out there, Chris. Just don't do it again, buddy. It's feeling really good. And now you have a former first-round pick in Penny, who they've been trying to get the ball more and more every year, but the guy just can't stay healthy. There's not much back here threatening Chris Carson. I'm not worried about Travis Homer. I'm not worried about his teammate, Travis Homer, as I believe from college, DJ Dallas. I'm just not worried about it. So what did Seattle do in the offseason? Well, they did a good amount in the offseason. They end up adding to their offensive line a good bit. BJ Finley, Ogbuye, Brandon Shell, and then they add Philip Dorsett, a speedy receiver on the outside, adding more depth, right? More speed. Pretty good wide receiver 3 set here with DK Metcalf, Lockett, and now Philip Dorsett. And they get a veteran in Greg Olsen, who I think is a good fit for this team. They're going to use a ton of tight ends between Jacob Hollister, Will Dissly, and Olsen, but I do think it's a good fit for the team at this point in his career. End up losing George Fant, who honestly wasn't that good last year at all. I believe George Fant is now with the New York Jets. They lose Hermaine Effendi and Justin Britt, so just some more offensive guard and offensive line pieces that were filled via free agency. What did they do in the NFL draft? Honestly, it was one of the worst NFL drafts I've seen at this point. DJ Dallas in the 4th round. They ended up taking a tight end in the 4th round as well. Why do you need all those? Damian Lewis in the 3rd round. So they really didn't address offense until the 3rd round with an interior offensive lineman. Maybe he'll play center. But then they got 2 tight ends. They got a receiver in the 6th round, and Freddie Swain, who doesn't profile out to be NFL caliber. And then they got a 4th round running back, who I like in DJ Dallas, is comped to Thomas Rawls, a former Seattle back. But I'm not too sure how much he's going to play, especially now with this Carlos Hyde signing. So the Seahawks have one of the worst off seasons, in my opinion, when it comes to combining your draft with your additions. They got some old veterans in terms of skill position players in their free agency, and then not much going on in the draft. So that's a concern. But it almost didn't matter for Chris Carson. Like, the offensive line had improved as the season had gone on, dating back 2 years ago. It continued to improve. Now they've lost pieces on it, so it's going to see how can they come together as a cohesive unit, especially with the pandemic going on, not being able to work as much together. That will be a question, but that will also be a question for just a lot of teams in general. The durability of Chris Carson. He missed 12 games with a fractured ankle in 2017. He was only on the injury report once in 2018, didn't miss any games with a hip strain. And then last year, he came out of the game in week 16 early with that hip fracture, missed week 17, missed the playoffs, and now he's going to be coming back, and we're kind of waiting to see what he looks like after this hip fracture and the surgery that he had for it. So who does he have to compete with in this backfield? Well, it was Rashad Penny, Travis Homer, and the rookie DJ Dallas, until yesterday I had to go back and edit this and put Carlos Hyde in there. So I have Rashad Penny, Carlos Hyde, Travis Homer, and DJ Dallas as the backfield competition. And you could put like a red X over Rashad Penny's name for now, because they were saying he might end up on the PUP list, the PUP, physically unable to perform. And based on the signing of Carlos Hyde, it feels really good that they're probably going to be putting Rashad Penny on that list, and he might miss a very, very large chunk of the 2020 season. And this should have been seen a little bit because they offered a sheet to Devonta Freeman, and they have $4 million. This is a 1-year, $4 million deal. I'm sure a lot of it for Carlos Hyde is in incentives, but Devonta Freeman wanted to be paid more. I can't blame the guy. You should want to get paid more as much as you can, especially when your position is constantly underpaid, and it seems like the market cap for it really is just shrinking, if anything, when a lot of other players are starting to increase. It's kind of backwards, but Devonta Freeman, they pretty much said, we're not paying you that, so we'll see if he ends up landing with the Eagles, but at this point, it's going to be Carlos Hyde is probably the main backup right now. The backups last year were Rashad Penny, though, on this team, and how they performed was 23.6% of the snaps in 9 games before injury. He had 65 attempts for 270 yards and 4 touchdowns. He caught 8 balls of 11 targets. Honestly, he was not that efficient. He had like one game where he popped off and he started to take a little bit more of the snap share from Carson. Carson fumbled in that game, and then in the second half, Penny to the right side took a long touchdown to the house, so it kind of spiked up a lot of his numbers, but just in general, he was highly inefficient in both the preseason and regular season last year. And then once Penny went down, Travis Homer and Marshawn Lynch come into the picture, and Homer plays 5 games, was not that great at all, 26% of the snaps, only had 18 carries for 114 yards, but what you really got to see was his passing game role. He caught 11 to 13 targets for 56 yards, and in those couple of weeks, having 11 catches in 5 games and really just 4 games of work as sort of a complement piece to Marshawn Lynch is somewhat impressive for a younger kid last year. And then lastly, you do have DJ Dallas. In 2019, DJ Dallas played for Miami, Florida. He had 3 years there total, but in 2019, had 115 attempts, 687 yards, and then he piled on 14 receptions on 22 targets, 10 total touchdowns. Again, I mean, he was a guy who didn't have a full workhorse role there. You see only 129 total touches last year for less than 900 total yards, but he's a guy who they drafted in the 4th round, potentially based on all the injuries to Carson before this Carlos Hyde addition, could have taken on a little bit of the workload here, similar to Thomas Rawls a couple years ago when a ton of injuries hit the Seattle backfield. So I did not move Chris Carson based on the acquisition. I slightly did for maybe like 5 minutes from 17 to 19. Then I moved him back up to 17. As long as Chris Carson himself is healthy, I think this is going to be somebody who the Seahawks are fine giving the ball 20 plus times. Like, yes, Russell Wilson is out there and Tyler Lockett and now Greg Olsen and DK Metcalf, who I think is going to be a stud, but this is still a run-first offense, especially if they have any sort of lead in the second half. They heavily skew to the run. My number 18th ranked running back is going to be Melvin Gordon, the new Denver Bronco. Last year, he played 12 games. He missed 4 games to start the season due to his holdout. He played on 55.6% of the snaps for the Chargers, 162 carries for 612 yards in 9 touchdowns. He caught 42 of 55 balls. So check down Phillip Rivers was in full effect not only for Austin Eckler, but even Melvin Gordon had 42 receptions in those 12 games. He had 296 receiving yards. This is where he ranked in the 12 games that he actually played when you just look at the entire league from weeks 5 to weeks 17. In those 12 games, he ranked 10th amongst running backs in receptions, 11th in receiving yards. He ranked 6th in total touchdowns. He had 15.1 fantasy points per game, and he had 0.44 fantasy points per snap, which ranked 9th, top 10 in that department. Overall, in those 12 weeks, he was the RB20, and it's hard to do much better than that in those 12 weeks when Austin Eckler is splitting a backfield for you and pushing for a top 10 running back performance. He did see 37 red zone touches in the 12 weeks, and that ranked 15th in the entire league, even when you factor in that he missed 4 weeks. So he was still getting the ball there. He saw 19.8% of the red zone touches on the ground. That was 8th in the entire league. And he saw 9.3% of the offense's touches inside the 5-yard line, which ranked 4th in the entire league. So what was the concerns with Melvin Gordon? Well, he was tied for first in fumbles with Chris Carson and Carlos Hyde, so those mates sharing a backfield now. He was 51st in true yards per carry at just 3.7 and 38th in yards per route run. The true yards per carry stuff is definitely partially his fault, but also a terrible offensive line, so it's going to factor in a little bit, but he just lost a ton of efficiency, partially due to that bad offensive line that they have now improved, although he's gone when you go and look at the Chargers. But a ton of efficiency was lost yet last year in both a yards created metric and both an evaded tackles metric. So you can see Ian Hartitz here talking about the 2016-2018 Melvin Gordon, where he led the league by a mile, 23 broken tackles more than anybody else. Well, last year, if you just look at those 12 weeks, he ranked 26th in that department. So maybe a little bit out of shape. Maybe his feet weren't under him for the first couple of weeks of the season as he came into the regular season right there in week 5 when everybody was good, had a month under their belt. And he didn't have any type of training camp or preseason, so it might have taken him a little bit to get into the breaking tackles habits because he ranked outside the top 25 last year for those 12 weeks when you look at everybody else during those 12 weeks. And then also his efficiency dropped in a major way. You can look at David Zatch's tweet here, 2018 to 2019. I'll just circle the overall yards created metric, so how much they're creating on their own, not really worrying about the offensive line. It went from plus 0.62 in terms of overall every single category that you're looking at, after contact, adjusted for offensive lines, per receptions, per attempt, so trying to get everything in there, to negative 0.53. So it was a major 180 literally for Melvin Gordon last year in terms of his efficiency compared to the year before that. So what happened in the offseason now, at least in Denver, to feel good about Melvin Gordon being there? Well, he was obviously acquired. Their entire draft was fantastic for offense. You got Albert O, a fast tight end, 2 very speedy receivers, possibly the best route runner in the league in Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, who did not run a 40, but many have said he would have ran in the 4.2s out of Penn State. They added Nick Vannett in free agency. And then a big one that I think is going to go underrated is Graham Glasgow, the former Detroit Lion. Graham Glasgow, I'll put up right now just the offensive line rankings for Denver last year. Their O-line ranked 16th in run blocking and 14th in pass protection. But they added Graham Glasgow from Detroit, who was PFF's number 9 graded overall run blocker in 2019 and 11th overall graded guard amongst all guards last year. Now, they did lose Connor McGovern, which is going to be huge for them. He was the team's #1 pass protector, and he was the second best run blocker on this team, and the 4th best pass protecting center in the entire league. So that's going to hurt for Drew Lock. They still do have tackle Garrett Bowles, who, after an impressive 2019, ended up playing 16 games, over 1,000 snaps, and at a 76.1 overall PFF grade. That is very solid. The team ran the 14th most times per game last year, and it was mainly through a pretty even split running back by committee between Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman. Lindsay played on 53.5% of the snaps last year. He had 224 carries, and he added 35 receptions. He saw 7 total touchdowns, 48 targets. He ranked 22nd in true yards per carry at 4.3. And then you had Royce Freeman in 2019, who ended up seeing 49.9% of the snaps, as close as you can get to a full-on RBCC. He had 132 carries and a very interesting 43 receptions on 50 targets. He was more involved in the passing game last year than Phillip Lindsay. That's not something that you usually think about. He was 50th, though, in true yards per carry at 3.7. So the backfield competition is mainly going to be Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman back here. Melvin Gordon should jump right to the top of that list. I think that you're going to see a complement role as backups between both Royce Freeman and Phillip Lindsay. I wouldn't be shocked if Royce Freeman was cut. They like all these backs, but if you're going to go spend money on Melvin Gordon and acquire him, a veteran, it's not like you can just start giving the ball 50% of the time or anywhere near that now to Royce Freeman as your third string running back. Durability of Melvin Gordon at least should be questioned a little bit. In 2015, he missed 2 games with a knee injury. In 2016, he misses 3 games with a hip strain. In 2018, he misses 4 games with a hamstring. And then in 2019, he misses 4 games due to the holdout. So he actually did stay healthy last year, but he kind of gave you those missed games just by holding out instead. The only season where he's played every single snap in every single game without missing time outside of just injury reports and missing some practice time was 2017. So Melvin Gordon for me is somebody that I profile out as being a running back that they want to give the ball, and based on quotes from the team, 18 times per game. They have an offense now that is very set up to be pass friendly. They have an offensive line now with the addition of Graham Glasgow that should help with the running games. The offensive line overall, like I said, ranked last year around 16th in run blocking, 14th in pass protection, around 15th overall. So very average. The loss of Connor McGovern, the addition of Graham Glasgow, I think it balances it out a little bit, helps the running game for sure, probably hurts the passing game a little bit when it comes to pass protection. So I do think there's a lot of weapons. I think that opens it up for Melvin Gordon. I think without question, he's going to be the goal line back. It comes down to this. Melvin Gordon will be a top 20 back and likely a top 15 back if Drew Lock is good. Why? Because they'll move the ball, they'll get into the red zone, and Melvin Gordon is going to get all the touches inside the red zone. If Drew Lock is bad and they don't get into the red zone as much, he's going to be pushed outside probably the top 20 and maybe even the top 25 because he's going to be pretty dependent on touchdowns. I think he'll catch the ball a good amount, but with Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman still on the team, I also think they're going to see a decent amount of receptions, at least for their role. So if we can get Melvin Gordon to seeing 10 to 12 touchdowns, yeah, he's going to be a top 15 back. If he's only scoring 6 touchdowns, he's probably going to be pushed outside the top 25, and a lot of that is going to be on the shoulders of Drew Lock, who they have surrounded with so much talent now. It's just up to him to get that ball inside the 20-yard line and start pounding the rock with Melvin Gordon. Get us some TDs, baby. Real quickly, take a second, hit that big old like button right there, big old hand, and then smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell if you can. All those things let me reach more people. If you're watching this right now and saying, hey, I just stumbled upon your video, or yeah, my friend told me about you, that's because of all these things, right? If you stumbled upon the video, the YouTube algorithm did it. Your friend probably saw it because somebody else was liking the video and all that stuff. So please do hit those things and hop into the Discord totally free down below. Let's get back into this beautiful video. It's crazy for me to think that right now I have Le'Veon Bell at running back 19, and I'm not totally against him. Like, I think some people have him lower into the 20s, but like what, 2 years ago, this guy was arguably the RB1 before his holdout. It's just insane how much a couple of years does make, but he's getting up there in age, right? 2 years ago, he was in his prime at 26 years old. Now he's 28 years old with a whole year taken off and really did not show too much last year. Wasn't god-awful, but really wasn't that great either, especially when it came to an efficiency standpoint. So Le'Veon Bell did play 15 games for the Jets last year in his first year, even though Adam Gase probably didn't want him there, but 87.2% of the snaps. He saw 246 carries, only 789 yards, and just 4 touchdowns. 66 receptions, though, on 78 targets. That was nice. Since Le'Veon Bell has been always known as sort of a pass-catching running back, I broke his stats down into and really where he ranked receiving and rushing categories. So first off, I'll put receiving onto the board. Take a little gander at this, get your eyeballs all loosened up, because right now last year in the receiving game, he was highly involved. 4th in routes run out of all running backs, 7th in targets and 7th in receptions, 9th in yards and 8th in red zone targets. So all that stuff is great, especially you start to see him 8th in red zone targets. It just doesn't pay off by getting the touchdowns. Here's where it was bad, and you can see red means bad. Red means stop at the light. Red means very bad. Red means you're crossing it out with an X on their name on a piece of paper where you don't like those people. It's bad. 31st in ADOT, averages up the target. 46th in yards after the catch per reception, and 40th in yards per reception among running backs. So this is not good. This means he was catching the ball like at the line of scrimmage and just falling down onto the ground, right? That is not what we like to see out of Le'Veon Bell. A lot of it is just based on probably the plays. He was probably just a last second check down option. So this tells us that he wasn't really factored into passing plays as much. He wasn't schemed for as much as just being a last second check down and a quick escape route. And a lot of the time with 66 receptions, but based on the fact that these weren't downfield targets on the yards per reception, nothing after the catch, it probably tells me that he was just a last second check down and he was getting tackled immediately. So what I would like to see is just more involvement in terms of being schemed into the offense. In the running game last year, he was 67th in true yards per carry with just 3.2. I mean, when the guy goes for 246 carries and can't break 800 yards, you can probably tell that it was a terrible yards per carry season for him. He only had one rush of 15 plus yards. Only one rush. That's a breakaway run, just one last year. His yards per touch were 51st. His yards created were at least decent at 21st because of his pass catching work. And then his fantasy points per opportunity. Get ready for this because it's triple digits. It's pretty crazy. 101st, Le'Veon Bell's fantasy points per opportunity. Now, since he had so much work, he'll never be like first or second or third because once you get more touches, your efficiency starts to drop. If you have 5 touches and 100 yards in those 5 touches, obviously you're going to be ranked higher in that category. But outside the top 100, that's just flat out bad. And a good chunk of this had to do with just having one of the worst offensive lines in the entire league last year. It did not help Sam Darnold and him getting sacked and seeing ghosts nonstop. And it definitely did not help one Le'Veon Bell. The offensive line last year, in terms of run blocking, ranked 30th out of 32 teams. Absolutely brutal. 3rd worst in the league. And their pass protection ranked 28th in the league. That was bottom 6 in the league in the entire NFL. Because of this, the Jets just said, we're not going to run. They ran the 26 most times per game because they were trailing in games, because their offensive line stunk, because their defense was at least half decent, but never that elite or great. And 24 per game was their amount of rushing attempts. Now, they did some things in the offseason that should actually make you a little bit happy. We just talked about Connor McGarvin leaving Denver. He actually went to one of the best pass blocking centers in the league, 4th overall. He went to the Jets. They got George Font from Seattle, who we talked about leaving there, although he was never really great. He's just kind of a meh offensive lineman, but Conor McGregor, a huge piece. And look at all the guards that they actually signed or added. Alex Lewis, they re-signed. Josh Andrews and Greg Van Rotten, inside offensive linemen, they ended up signing. So they add a lot of depth to this line. I mean, it was their biggest weakness last year, so you might as well fix it. They took Frank Gore as now a backup running back. They got Brashad Perriman in free agency. So a lot of activity. They ended up losing a ton of people as well. Ty Montgomery, he's gone. He signs with the Saints. Demaryius Thomas, he's gone. Robbie Anderson, he's gone. He signs with Carolina, right? A ton of guards in general. Ryan Khalil, Tom Compton. You can look at all of them. Brendan Shell, Kelvin Beachman. So many guards, and that's why they had to add a lot in the offseason from free agency and then the NFL draft. I'll circle the draft now because they take Mikael Becton, a guy who was pushing a car and increasing his draft stock likely because of that, in the 1st round with the 11th overall pick. And then I love what they did in the 2nd round, getting Denzel Mims at the back end of the 2nd round. And then they pick up another offensive tackle in the 4th round in Cameron Clark. LaMichael Pirine at that point looked to be a backup running back, but now probably 3rd string behind Frank Gore. So a pretty good offseason for the Jets, in my opinion. They filled big needs. They got Connor McGarvin and Mikael Becton in the draft and free agency for the offensive line, and that was their biggest need. I think that was a very good move by the Jets, both of those additions. Because, I mean, the line was so bad. Nobody played over 810 snaps. Nobody played more than 14 games last year, and nobody had a PFF grade of over 67.5. 67.5 is right around average. So their best offensive lineman last year was average. That is not good because that means the overall average of the line, when you factor in everybody, was well below average at that point. So what does the backfield competition look like for Le'Veon Bell? Well, last year, I mean, there was a lot of backs who were in this backfield, Ty Montgomery being one of them, but they just never gave those guys the ball. When you factor in both his pass catching work and his touches on the ground, the man had over 300 touches. So I don't know if we get another 300 touch season, but I think it's very much in the cards for Le'Veon Bell. And the backfield competition doesn't scare me. It's Frank Gore, who they just signed, who's going to be 38 years old. LaMichael Pirine, Josh Adams, and Trenton Canton. I believe they'll probably cut Cannon or Adams or both of them. Pirine, the rookie, might get some involvement, but now with Frank Gore there, I don't think it's going to be much. Gore last year only played 37% of the snaps, sort of lost his job during the last 5 or 6 games last year in Buffalo to Devin Singletary. He had 166 carries, 599 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He got 13 balls on 16 targets for 100 yards. So there's nobody in this backfield to take pass catching work away from Le'Veon Bell. So I'm not worried about that. The man caught 66 balls last year. And if anything, his efficiency numbers that we went through just have to get better in that department. So even if he drops to like 60 receptions, 55, the efficiency numbers are probably good enough to outdo last season in the receiving game. And the man averaged 3.2 yards per carry on the ground, true yards per carry. That's likely to regress at least to like 3.7 or 4 overall, which helps him even more. So I don't think Frank Gore is going to see, like he did last year, 180 total touches. No, because Frank Gore started last year as the starting running back in Buffalo, and it took Devin Singletary after injury probably 8 to 10 weeks to actually take over as a workhorse back in that offense for Buffalo. So I do think Frank Gore probably comes in and sees maybe 100 touches in this backfield, and I'm not too worried about that because that's what a backup running back will do. They'll see around 100 touches. They'll see around 5 or 6 touches per game. So I'm not concerned about that. It just hurts Michael Pirine more than Le'Veon Bell. So Frank Gore being added by this team, it really didn't move Le'Veon Bell much much for me. I think Le'Veon Bell's still going to see the red zone work. Maybe Frank Gore comes in on a 4th and inches. He comes in to refresh Le'Veon Bell after Le'Veon Bell gets his first and maybe his only, yet again, 15-plus yard run of the season. But I'm not too worried about Frank Gore. He ranked 60th last year in yards per carry, true yards per carry at 3.4. Michael Pirine, I'll put up his profile, my rookie profile for him. All these profiles will be in the draft kit for every single rookie, and I have a lot of the NFL players for this year. You can see right here, he played 4 years at Florida. Last year, 132 carries, 11 touchdowns, over 650 yards. And he was a pass-catching threat, so if anybody's going to steal work from Bell, it would be Pirine. He got 40 of 55 targets last year and 11.8% target share as a running back. Anything over 10% is very good. Really, anything over 8.5%, 9% looks good, but in college, almost 12%, that's elite. He had a 72.7% catch rate, and during his entire career at college, 4 years, he got 72 balls on 98 targets. So a very good pass catching back coming out of college for the Jets. So if we get any sort of improvement out of this offensive line, and you can see Adam Pfeiffer's tweet right here, longest run for Le'Veon Bell last 2 seasons is 27 yards, and he only had 1 run of 15 or more last year. It was brutal. The offensive line was terrible, but you can see very much similar to what you saw Adam say in this tweet. It should help getting Becton and McGarvin. I think it will really help them. And if that's the case, I think Le'Veon Bell will be a top 20 running back for 2020. My 20th ranked running back is the rookie Jonathan Taylor. And before anybody goes crazy, I'm completely fine getting Jonathan Taylor in the 4th and 5th round. Sure, you don't want him in the 3rd round, that's fine. But a lot of your league mates are not going to have as much faith in a rookie. This is the best pure runner that we've ever seen probably in college in terms of zone running. And now he's going behind the best zone runner that we've ever seen in probably the last decade and definitely the last 2 years in Quentin Nelson in Indy. It is a no-brainer. But Sal, Marlon Mack, and Naheem Hines, they're all there. Oh my God. Yeah, well, that's why he's going in the 4th or 5th round. If those guys weren't there, he'd be going as a 1st round pick. And I'm not even kidding about that. This is a 1st round talent. This is the talent level without the pass catching ability, though, of Saquon Barkley. The pure running right now of Jonathan Taylor is better than Saquon Barkley when you talk about just on the ground. Saquon Barkley went as a pretty easily 1st round pick. He was going as top 10 picks in most drafts. The fact that Marlon Mack is still there and Naheem Hines, for some reason, people are getting all worked up about, is still there, is driving Jonathan Taylor as a 4th or 5th round pick, and you can easily get him there. Heck, if you want to take him in the 3rd round, I'm not going to argue too much with you. Yes, I think it starts to get a little bit riskier there in terms of what else you could have had in those rounds, but in the 4th and 5th round, you're choosing Jonathan Taylor between him and the likes of Devin Singletary, between him and the likes of Mark Ingram. Those guys are not going to win you leagues. Devin Singletary is going to regress after an insane last year on a per touch basis. Mark Ingram is on the wrong side of 30. These types of guys are not going to win you leagues. They're just going to be guys on your roster. Jonathan Taylor, if he pops up and he's a top 10 running back, and he definitely can be in his situation, his skill set, his team, his offensive line, then that's going to win you leagues in the 4th and 5th round. So yes, he's a top 20 running back for me, and only it'll get higher based on news that we'll get from the coaches. Them telling me that Naheem Hines is an unselfish player and he doesn't care if he gets the ball 5 to 10 times, and that being twisted as a bad thing for Jonathan Taylor, makes me scratch my head. So in 2019, Jonathan Taylor ended up seeing over 300 carries, 320 to be exact, over 2,000 yards and 21 touchdowns, and he caught 26 balls on 37 targets. The knock on Jonathan Taylor, though, his pros and cons, one of the big cons, he had a 12.3% drop rate during college. His pass catching role is not that great, and he fumbled 17 times. Yeah, those are not great things. But you can shore up fumbling. You can shore up just dropping 5-yard passes, right? And his pass catching role was a lot better than people expect. Like, let me throw this up on the board. He came out of Wisconsin, so he gets a bad rep because they don't use their running backs. Melvin Gordon, who's been a very good pass catcher, probably because of the system with Phillip Rivers while he's with the Chargers, but Melvin Gordon only caught in 3 years 22 balls in Wisconsin. Jonathan Taylor last year in 14 games caught 26 balls alone, scored more touchdowns, had more yards all in 1 season than you got out of Melvin Gordon in 3 seasons with Wisconsin. So yes, when you're comparing Jonathan Taylor to Clyde Edwards-Helaire and DeAndre Swift in this draft, yeah, he's going to fall behind those guys in pass catching ability. But the knock on Jonathan Taylor automatically becomes, and go watch the tape, the guy can catch the ball, the guy can do stuff after the catch. He said it at the combine that he's a good pass catcher, but the knock on him is when you're comparing him to other guys. That's like saying that Aaron Jones is not a good pass catcher because Christian McCaffrey's in the NFL. That makes no sense to me. So Jonathan Taylor, to me, I think is being extremely, extremely undervalued, even in PPR formats. For some reason, people think that he's just LeGarrette Blount right now. This is a good pass catching running back. He just doesn't profile out as some of the elite pass catching running backs, but that's fine. Neither did Melvin Gordon, and Melvin Gordon last year, in 12 games alone, caught 42 balls. So what did the Colts do in free agency to maybe help Jonathan Taylor and their team in general? Well, they got Phillip Rivers. The man that I was just telling you threw the ball nonstop to Melvin Gordon 42 times last year in 12 games, not even counting Austin Eckler's role, and now that's going to be in the backfield here. So when Jonathan Taylor's on the field, he can actually prove that he's a 3-down running back, and I do think he's going to do that at some point this season and start chucking the ball down to, maybe it'll be Naheem Hines, maybe it'll be Marlon Mack sometimes, but it's going to be Jonathan Taylor at some point, and he's going to command the ball. They ended up getting Roosevelt Nix, which will help in terms of just the run blocking. He is a fullback, and they lost some decent pieces, like, right? Eric Ebron, they lost, who cares? He wanted to quit on the team. They lost Josh Andrews at center, Devin Funchess, who played like 1 game and then got hurt for them. So not a ton was lost. If anything, they just gained overall in free agency because of acquiring Phillip Phillip Rivers, in my opinion. The NFL draft was really good for them. They got Michael Pittman in the second round. He should be able to come in. They want him to play the X receiver role. Then they'll put T.Y. Hilton on the other outside. And then Paris Campbell, coming back from injury last year, will be in the slot as an explosive slot receiver. They traded up for Jonathan Taylor in the second round, got their possible future QB in Jacob Eason in the fourth round, and then got some offensive line help and a late round wide receiver. So the backfield competition is Marlon Mack, Nyheim Hines, and Jordan Wilkins. Not worried about Wilkins. I'm honestly not worried about Nyheim Hines, although some other people are tweeting about it, because in an article that was paraphrased improperly, in my opinion, they said that Nyheim Hines is like expected to still get some work, and the coach said he's unselfish so he can modify his role. But for some reason, that's a bad thing for Jonathan Taylor, that this guy is going to modify his role to like 2 touches per game. But if for some reason people think that means like 3 to 5 receptions per game, not going to happen. So Marlon Mack is a free agent after this year. He's due $2.1 million. Maybe in a contract year, he'll do good, but that's if they put him on the field. Last year, though, 55.5% of the snaps, had 247 attempts, and he had over 1,000 yards, and that was missing a couple of games. He only played 14 total games, 12.8 fantasy points per game. He only caught 14 balls on 17 targets, though. So the guy was elite. I mean, through the first 4 or 5 games of the season, he was the leading rusher in the NFL in terms of how many rush attempts per game. But that's not that hard to do when you're running behind Quentin Nelson. And I do like Marlon Mack. I really do. I think he's gotten the short end of the stick kind of with this whole situation in drafting Jonathan Taylor. But the facts are that Jonathan Taylor is just a much better version of Marlon Mack. Marlon Mack is the light package, the poor man's Jonathan Taylor, in my opinion. Nyheim Hines has 2 years left on his contract. His contract is 4 years for $3.8 million. He is due $750,000 this year. He played on 32% of the snaps last year, 52 carries for 199 yards. He caught 44 balls on 58 targets, 6.6 fantasy points per game. He was tied for 16th with running back receptions and targets last year. He played every single game Nyheim Hines did. I do think Nyheim Hines is a good pro. I think he's experienced. I think he's a good pass catcher, but it's just not going to be enough, in my opinion, for him to be worked in. They're not going to use a 3-headed backfield monster here. You spend up, you trade up, if anything, right? You trade up. So you want this guy and Jonathan Taylor on your team. You trade up for him. Maybe it'll take him 2 to 3 weeks to break out. But if you're getting 10 to 12 to maybe 16 weeks of Jonathan Taylor as a workhorse, behind arguably the best offensive line and likely the best offensive lineman in the entire league in Quentin Nelson, a zone runner who was an elite in college and now is going into the best zone running blocking offense in the entire league right now in the Colts, yeah, I'll end up going there without a question. I like Jonathan Taylor as a top 20 running back. That's where I'm at right now. Those are my top 20 running backs. I'll put them all up on the screen. Let me know what you think of this video. Hit the subscribe button. Hit that button, right? Smash it. Appreciate you doing that. It really does help me reach more people. If you enjoy this type of content, all you got to do is hit that like button and it goes a long way. Notification bell and subscribe button, all those things. So the question of the day, would you rather have Melvin Gordon or Chris Carson? Let me know the answer of that right now and get into the Discord. It's totally free. Take 2 seconds of your time. What is Discord, you might ask? It's just a group messaging app where there's a ton of people in there. We're talking. I'll update you on the draft guide in there. I'll update you on anything else. We're making some dynasty leagues, some season-long leagues. So get into the Discord. It's very fun. It's easy. It's free. It's a way to be collaborative. It's a way to just kind of chat with other people who are like-minded to you. Hit the subscribe button before you go. Thank you so much for tuning in to another video. I will see you all in the next one.